Hi everyone, I'm Alice and I'm here interviewing Lexie Baynes, the Union Affairs Officer at Uni of Manchester's Student Union. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Lexie, I'm the Union Affairs Officer here. So I was elected back in March and now it's November, so I've had just over 100 days in the job since July. So yeah.
Nice. Can you start off by explaining your role as Union Affairs Officer to someone who maybe doesn't know what it is, doesn't know what you do in this union?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is that it's a very weird role. So I represent the union's affairs, and that's quite broad, but it means that basically I spend a lot of my time in committees, in meetings, usually with the university, and then also I'm the co-chair of the trustee board, I sit on the board of governors, I chair quite a few committees myself. So yeah, it's a lot to do with being in committees, essentially. But I basically make sure that I'm representing students in all the spaces that their voices need to be heard in. And that is a really important aspect of my role. I also work in a team of 8 other exec officers, and we've all got slightly distinct remits, but I think mine is maybe one of the broader remits, and it's a lot to do with governance in general, and then just making sure that I'm helping out where I can, when I can, with other people's work too.
Nice. Okay, so how do you think your role at the your experience, at the university as a student and your past, I think, what were you, managing editor?
I was opinion editor.
Opinion editor. How do you think those
give me a job boost there.
How do you think those experiences shaped your approach to this role?
Yeah, nice. So I think as a student, so I did English Lit and History here, studied here for 3 years, and I genuinely had a really good time. And I think I really enjoyed student life, and I threw myself into it and did lots of different things, so lots of co-curricular activities. So one of them was being head opinion editor at Mancunian, another was being on FuseTV. I had my own radio show here. I was a peer mentor. I volunteered with Debate Mate, which is a charity that goes out into local schools in Manchester and helps students learn how to debate, essentially.
Oh wow.
What else did I do? I did some volunteering with Once a Month Society, which is a period poverty society, played netball, so I did lots of different things. And I think that kind of gave me an overview of university life and actually just helped me have a really good time at uni too. And then, when Lead MCR happened, I was actually in my 2nd year when I knew that I'd apply for the role, which is a bit weird. But I'm type A, so I plan everything. And I was like, I'd actually like to help make sure that students have the same experiences, make sure that they have access to these type of things, make sure that they know what opportunities are available to them. So I think that's kind of how I ended up here. But also, I think if you know me, I'm type A and I'm also Virgo. So I think it's quite a natural role for me to fall into, essentially.
So starting out as a Union Affairs Officer, you promised to make student voices heard, as you've mentioned. What are your goals for this role?
In terms of student voice or more generally?
Student voices.
Okay, sure. I think one of the key things is making sure that student voice is heard in all the formal committee decision-making spaces at the university, because we're good at doing that at the union, don't be wrong, students literally run the union, that's the entire point of my role. But at the university, it's making sure that there's no disconnect there and that students' voices are heard. So that, some of that comes down to me preparing for these committees, making sure, I had finance and audit and risk today, so it's making sure that I've gone through all the papers, there are 400 in total, and it's okay, what do I think about this? What do students think about this? How does this impact students? And always bring it back to students. And that's quite a key goal. And then also I make sure that I write a lot of papers for these committees too. So Katie's our humanities officer, she sits on the board of governors with me, and we write a student context paper for the board. And previously it's been, taken as read, okay, cool. But this year we tried to be let's take it as read and now action this report. So we want it to be if we say that, I can't think of a statistic now, which is but if we say X amount of students feel like this, the board needs to make sure that we're working with the staff to actually action this. We can't just, brush these figures under the carpet. We need to actually action it. So it's making sure that, I am putting student voices in all those spaces. And today, for instance, in finance committee, as far as I'm aware, they've never had the Union Affairs Officer, who always sits on finance, write a paper. And then in the committee meeting today, I said at the end, can I write a paper for the next meeting in February? And they're yeah, cool. So I'm going to write a student context paper on finances. So, kind of breaking down, this is what students pay on rent, this is what they pay for bills, this is how they socialise, this is how they spend their money. So it's making sure that literally everyone that I can get to is somehow getting students into their own thinking, which, it's quite a big role, but I enjoy doing it. I think it's going well.
Speaking of, you did meet with the Directorate of Student Experience and discussed housing and new Fallowfield accommodation and approaches to direct action, as you mentioned.
Yes.
And as you know, this has been a problem for a very long time, accommodation, and it even stops students from coming to the Uni of Manchester to study. What steps have you taken to secure these affordable options?
Nice question. So I sit on... Okay, so a bit of context here is that, the uni's currently creating the new Fallowfield development. So it's called FRRP, which is the acronym. But basically the Fallowfield redevelopment. And it's going to be opening up, I believe, just under 6,000 bed spaces in Fallowfield. So it's going to see half of the existing accommodation portfolio in Fallowfield demolished and replaced by new stock. So it's really exciting. It's a big project. It's also a project which we definitely should have done about 10 years ago, and that is something which everyone very readily admits, and that has caused quite a few issues there. But so in terms of making sure that spaces are affordable, obviously this is a piece of work which I took on, and the previous Union Affairs officer did her work, and before that the previous Union Affairs officer also did her work on this. But it's quite a tricky task because of kind of the design that the uni's gone with. So they've gone with a build, design, operate and finance model. So they get an external contractor to basically take on this project, and that can cause a few complications, let's say, because it's being done by kind of their rulebook rather than our rulebook. And if 10 years, if this had been done 10 years ago, then maybe it'd be a different story, but that's kind of how it currently lies. So my job is, obviously I've kind of come into this role and taken on the workload, and I sit on the residences programme board. I have a lot of meetings with people who are involved in it at the university, and it's just making sure that I am making sure that students' voices are being heard in those spaces too. For instance, what do students think about the current rent prices, and how can we use that to influence the decisions? And what do students think about the current design of Fallowfield? Do they think it's a safe campus space to be in? Do they think it's got enough provision for them? Are they getting all the nightlife opportunities that they want? That type of thing, and it's making sure that it's being considered. And also right now, so we're in a period of financial close, so by this time next year we'll be finalising quite a few contract negotiations based with the preferred bidder. So it's making sure that in this year-long space, I'm trying to influence all decisions that are being made as much as possible. And I think my voice in these spaces is actually quite respected, but obviously there's always work that I can be doing on that front. And I think it is a really big task in general.
Speaking of, is there any concrete changes that you have made and can make obvious to everyone to show that you've done, other than the ones that you've mentioned so far?
Sure. I think kind of the key things for me is that, so I campaigned off of 3 key themes, which I thought were the kind of 3 key themes affecting students: living, expenses and student experience. Came into the role and kind of got this entire run through of, okay, this is how the land currently lies for living and expenses, student experience, all the rest of it. And there's some things which I will already admit that I can't action, even though I campaigned off it, because it would quite literally put the union in a very bad financial place, and I am not doing that, because then we won't have a union. So there's some things which I've kind of altered and had to had conversations about. But in terms of the concrete changes, I think some of the big things I've done so far is building a relationship with Duncan Iverson, our new President Vice Chancellor.
We've all seen that on your social media.
And our relationship is really key. I think it's quite a weird thing to stress, but we do work together a lot and very closely, and we have monthly one-to-ones. I've got it with him next week, and it's making sure that we work together in a really solid team in ourselves, because he represents kind of the university and I represent the students, so between us it's a lot of ground to cover. So I think that's kind of one of the big concrete changes. It was one of the things that I was really keen to do was within my first few weeks in the role, get to meet Duncan and make sure that we have a really productive work relationship. And I think, the response has been that I think that has happened. He called the Students' Union one of the best that he's worked with, so that's nice. But
good getting that sort of feedback.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think also I've done a lot of work on kind of some bigger projects, so such as open meetings. I was literally just in a meeting about it prior to this. And it's just making sure that we're kind of covering all the key topics which students want to hear, and a lot of the time I'm the one who knows what students want to hear, along with the rest of the team. So we've got quite a few coming out in semester 2 now, which are just being finalised, and that's really exciting, and hopefully students will get to see a bit of what goes on behind the scenes and get more understanding and more transparency about the key issues which they face.
Okay. Hi guys, we're back. We had a few technical issues, so this is a few months later, but all the questions are still context to a few months ago. So, okay, what are the active steps you've been taking to make sure that students of all backgrounds in regards to financial situations, gender, ethnicity and sexuality are all getting heard?
Yeah, sure. So EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion, is kind of a cross-cutting theme in everything that we do. It is something that's really important. And I think as an exec team, we always make sure that we're representing the right people in the right spaces, and really elevating particularly the marginalised voices where they need to be elevated. So in terms of active steps, so something we've done recently recently at the time of filming was uplift the bursary criteria to make sure that all students who were in like what we call the middle squeeze, so household incomes of between 33k to 40k, are now receiving the Manchester bursary, because that was previously a group which missed out on a lot of financial support. And like truly, I can't take all the credit for this. Like, a lot of this was the work of Hannah, who was Union Affairs before me. But yeah, it's something which we are really passionate about as a team, because what we wouldn't want to be in a situation is where like the kind of the same group of people receiving all the similar types of support. So we want to make sure that we're getting all the people from cross-cutting groups and different intersectionalities to make sure that everyone does feel supported throughout their time here, whether that's kind of financially or in terms of their identity, feeling safe on campus. You know, any issues like that is something that, yeah, as a team and like me and my role, we are really passionate about supporting. And then we also have Aisha, who's our Wellbeing Liberation Officer. So that is kind of all within her remit, but I make sure that I am like helping her where I can with kind of all the work that she gets. And we sit on a lot of EDI committees together, so we're both part of like the formal EDI committee and then EDI forum, which is more particularly about kind of students and staff networks. So we've got like the disability network, the inclusion network, the trans network, different places like that. And yeah, we always make sure that we're bringing student-facing issues to those networks, and saying, you know, we've heard from like our research and insight data that actually like people who use wheelchairs find it really difficult to access this particular building, or this kind of ramp isn't actually suitable, stuff like that. So yeah, so we always make sure that kind of EDI is at the forefront of what we're doing, and that we're representing the right people and the right identities in the right spaces too.
Okay. So your goal of reducing hidden academic costs, like hosting the second-hand materials fair, is something students would definitely benefit from. When can we expect to see these fairs, and how will you make sure that they reach the students that need them most? Yeah,
sure. So I literally have an email about this in my inbox right now. So at the time of filming, it's actually Refreshers Week. So this is kind of the prime time to be getting all of the semester 1 materials back from students if they want to donate it, now that they're heading into semester 2. So at the moment I work in the library to kind of get a bit of a book collection type of thing going, because the library used to do kind of like a scheme quite similar. They stopped, I don't know why. But yeah, so I'm trying to work with them. And then also we need to just make sure we're getting the comms and marketing right about this, because I don't want, well, if they want to, students can donate it to charity shops, but it'd be kind of better to keep it within the student ecosystem and, you know, rotating it around and around different classes. So yeah, it's something I'm working on right now. But the kind of, my full idea is for it to come into effect from September 2025 in time for semester 1. Because obviously right now semester 1 just finished, so we're collecting those materials and then like recycling them back in September. So yeah, that is the plan.
Okay, during the Times Higher Education World Academic Summit, which was a few months ago now, you said that you made sure student voices were at the forefront. Can you tell us a bit about the specific issues that you raised, and how did you represent students and how did they benefit from you being there?
Yeah, sure. So Aisha and I like hosted the summit, which is pretty kind of nuts. But yeah, so we were the ones who kind of linked all the different speeches and sessions of the day together. So, you know, a session would happen and we go up on stage and say, thank you for this, now next session's about this. So what we made sure to do was kind of embed our key takeaways in each section, which wasn't something we'd actually agreed with kind of the team running it, but we thought, oh, may as well just do it. But yeah, so we went up and we say, oh, like what we took away from that session was actually, you called it the cost of learning crisis, and that's something which really resonates with us, something which we also believe in. And it's kind of, you know, pointing out what we took away from it in a room of 500, 600 people actually does have quite an impact. So like, we kind of got verbal messages afterwards saying, oh, like you mentioned this and I didn't realise that was an issue facing students. So yeah, it was really like interesting to hear from other people the fact that they took on board what we were taking on board basically. Sorry, that's a very convoluted way of saying it. And then yeah, so we were kind of raising issues of the cost of learning crisis. We spoke as well, we had like a panel on the Greater Manchester Students Partnership. So I can't say names, can I? Our chief executive and other people who were involved in GMSP were on the panel. So we were kind of, you know, promoting that panel, saying we do this in Manchester, this is how it benefits the 120,000 students in the city region, this is how you could take away our key learnings to your like home cities or countries, and we were making sure that kind of student voice was at the forefront of the conference, when ironically there are no sessions actually about student voice as well. So kind of just us being there was the representation for students, which was necessary. Of course I would like to confer with that, like I would have loved to kind of have a student panel of like what it's like to be a student in 2024, you know, and have students like speak about their experiences like as an international student or as a home student or as a commuter student, you know, representing students in that way would have been really cool and really necessary. But it was pitched and ultimately said no to, so
that's all you can do. So there was obviously quite a lot of protests going on during that academic summit. In terms of representing the student voices at the summit, do you feel you were in any way representing the voices of the students who were protesting outside?
Yeah, sure. So as the protests were going on, the kind of situation was Aisha and I were on the inside of the summit, and our exec team, like the other 6, were kind of on the outside. So we were just making sure we were communicating really clearly about what's going on, who's affected, how many people involved, that type of thing, and making sure that the exec team, who ultimately, because they were outside, kind of had a bit more time and like freedom to do what they could there, were feeling supported, and they were speaking to the students, making sure the students were okay, because ultimately, like, we want to make sure the students feel supported and heard and really safe as well. Like, safety is a really big key issue here as well. So yeah, we were speaking with the exec team and saying like, oh, we've just heard something's going on here, like, is anyone free to go and check out with the students what's going on, can anyone send them a message, stuff like that. So yeah, trying to liaise with the right people basically. And yeah, I think as well what was quite impactful was the students did come on stage, and they did have, I think, about 10 minutes to kind of speak about the campaign demands and what they believe in, which I think is the right thing to do. Like, students should be having that space to kind of speak about, how they feel about what they're speaking about, that type of thing. And I think that was quite impactful. And certainly, like, we heard from people afterwards, they said like, oh, obviously when the protest was going on, the way it was handled was actually the right way to go about it. Like, the way that you just let students have the stage for 10 minutes and say their piece, that is ultimately the right way to go about it. Like, you wouldn't want to be in a situation where that isn't. So yeah.
Okay, so finally, now that you're in a few months into the role, a few more months into the role, is there any part of your original manifesto that you're rethinking or reshaping based on what you've learned?
Yeah, sure. So I think what's quite interesting is, like, when you're campaigning back in, it was like February, March time for me. This year it will be just February. You kind of have all these ideas and perceptions and like, this isn't right, I'm going to go fix it. And then you come into the role, it's like, oh, there's actually a working group for this and a task and finish group for this. And you had this conversation 2 years ago at the trustee board, but obviously I wasn't a trustee, so I wouldn't have seen it. So I feel like we all kind of underwent a bit of an adjustment and learning process where it was like, oh, like, this idea actually has been actioned before, but this was the reason why it was blocked or said no to, or did proceed in some cases. So I learned a lot to do about, like, food at the union in particular. You know, I was really passionate about putting money back in students' pockets, so like making sure our food and drink prices are as low as they can be. And while it has stayed that way, you know, I've spoken to our chief operating officer about the accounts, and it's kind of proven that if I were to push ahead with some things, it actually be at the detriment of the running of the union. You know, like, we would be making a massive loss in this place or not being able to gain things in other places. So I've been working really closely with like our operations assistant on the running of food at the union in particular, and making sure that everything at Corridor Coffee is still under £5, that we're introducing, like, nutritious meals in particular is a really big one. In my calendar as well, next week I've got a session on, like, kind of looking at our food menus and are they fit for purpose, essentially? Like, should we constantly be forcing students to eat, like, deep fried onion rings and chips? Like, my personal opinion is no. While there are obviously reasons why that should be the case in some situations, like, I want students all to have the ability to access, like, healthy vegetarian, veggie food, halal food. So yeah, we're reviewing the menu, which is quite exciting. Like, there's a lot of groups which exist at the university which I've now lobbied to be a part of, whether that's kind of the infrastructure strategy, which completely aligns with one of my themes, which was living. You know, a lot of the work that I said that I wanted to do under living really aligns with that group. So it's just making sure that I am in that space and, you know, lobbying on certain things that I'd like to change at the university in particular. So yeah, a learning curve, but I think it's quite satisfying seeing all the different places that you can fit yourself into and be like, oh, I want to change this, so I need to speak to this person or be a part of this group or just go about this myself. Which is,
Do you have a goal that you want to accomplish by the end of the year?
Yeah, so I think the really big one on my plate at the moment, which obviously wasn't on my idea statement because I would not have known about this as a student, is to do with our block grant. So the university's main source of funding the students' union's main source of funding is the university, and we get a large block grant from them, which we kind of renew every 3 years. So we're about to enter what we call, like, block grant negotiations, which is about a 3 to 4 month period of negotiating, like, how much we want and what places it would go, what we do with it, what the impact of that would be in particular. And it's something which myself and 2 other colleagues in the Students' Union lead on. So that is really exciting. And, like, we're talking in the millions. Well, block grant is in the millions, but we're now kind of working out where we want to go with that in particular, what figure we'd settle on. So I think that's a really big thing I want to achieve, because that would essentially be me preparing the union for the next 3 years, which is kind of crazy. But
big setup.
Yeah, because obviously I want students for the next 3 years to feel like the union kind of supports and develops them in all the ways they want and feel necessary. So it's really making sure that students, do feel like they can access that from the students' union. So yeah, it's kind of crazy, but really fun.